Now, when it comes to chord voicing, the simple rule is this. You can build chords in thirds, but you can play those notes anywhere. Let me show you what I mean. Take our C major triad. So you build the chords in thirds, but I can take any of those three notes and I can put them anywhere on the keyboard. I could take that root C and I could put it down here. I could put it down another octave. I could leave the third out here and put the third up here. I could take this fifth and I could double it down here. I could put the third down here. If I added a second, here's the triad, add that second. I could put the root down here. I could put that D on top. You can double. I can have it down there and up here. You can put the third down here and the second up high. Sometimes what I do is I like to have the third down low, but no third in the top part. I could bring the root up here, so I've got that 1, 2, 5 structure that we talked about. That's a pretty typical C2 chord voicing for me. But you see my point? We think about building chords in thirds, but then you can take those notes and move them absolutely anywhere. Now, if you're talking keyboard, that's going to be slightly different voicings from guitar, just the physical nature of guitar. If you're talking voicings for like a background vocal group, a praise team, for instance, you're going to voice things differently. You voice things differently for strings and for brass, and we kind of dive into that a little bit in the book. But voicings for different instruments are going to vary. The whole idea of voicing is that you can tell. I mean, obviously, just playing things in triads has a certain sound, but this is a C, but this is also a C. So obviously, voicing can really enhance the sound of the triad. Now, having said that, I mean, there are times when just simple triads are awesome. Paul McCartney did pretty well just with simple triads, right? The song Shine by Matt Redman is another great example of how simple triads can sound very awesome and classic. But for a lot of the time, what you're looking for is ways to, how can I take the simple triads on this music page and turn it into something really cool? So I always say the steps would be added tones, like we talked about just a little bit ago. Voicing options, you want to spread out, enhance as much as you can for your instrument. And look in terms of adding sevenths, adding ninths perhaps. Those are kind of the first three things that my brain goes to when I look at a simple chord chart of just ways to enhance it. How do you take a good chart and turn it into something, how do you take basic and turn it into brilliant, basically. Now, when you start voicing, there's a couple of things you have to take into consideration if you are going to, for instance, arrange something for your praise team. And here's a great word from College Theory, tessitura. Now, what this means basically, just think about it this way. If you take this note, take this A440. Now, for a soprano, that note is pretty much, right in the center of their range. So they'll sing that note and it'll sound like that's a pretty attainable note. Now, if I give that note to an alto, you can see where for the alto range, that's getting fairly high in their range. So they have to put out a little bit more effort. So if an alto sings that same A, they've got to crank it a little bit. So it's going to be a little more pointed. Now, if I give that A to a guy, to a high tenor, he's got a belt, he's got a crank to sing that same A. So when it comes to voicing, you have to know the tessitura of the instrument or the voice that you're giving that note to. In other words, for a tenor, that A is in the high tessitura. It's in the high part of their range. So it's going to be pointed. It's going to be cranked. There's no way they can come in and start a phrase on that note softly. They've got to belt it. Versus a soprano, sort of in the middle of their range, kind of a moderate tessitura for them, that A could be very soft and very mellow and very blendable. So you need to sort of get to know the tessitura, the ranges for all the instruments. For instance, same way if you got a brass section, you give that A to a trumpet, it's kind of right in the heart of their range, no problem at all. You give that to a French horn or a trombone, it's going to be at the peak of their range, so they're going to have to really hit that note hard. So when it comes to chord voicings, you just have to kind of know the ranges of the instruments that you're writing for and that you're voicing for, and be sure you know how it's going to sound. Make sense?